Bill, I think we're live. Ed just came in and said he's watching.
Oh, is that right?
So we're go. We're waiting for an announcement. Yep.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. My name is Bill Simons. I'm Executive Secretary of the Coalition for Career Development, and I'd like to welcome you to our session today, The Power of Career Development to Create a More Effective, Efficient, and Equitable System. Our conversation today is going to focus on work done by the Coalition for Career Development. The Coalition for Career Development consists of more than 36 major national education, business, and government organizations, such as the National Governors Association, Council of Chief State School Officers, and many others. And we've worked together collectively to frame a new vision for education. One of the first things the Coalition did was to develop a vision statement. And the vision statement says, the Coalition for Career Development is committed to making career readiness the first priority of American education. This is really a call for a major culture change in education. We're calling for moving away from the intensive overemphasis on standardized testing and more towards an individualized approach where we help each student figure out what their talents, abilities, and interests are, what career might work for them, and what the best pathway is to pursuing that career. And we feel that this approach has enormous potential to improve education. Last year, the Coalition published a white paper, Career Readiness for All. And you can access that white paper on our website, coalitionforcareerdevelopment.org. And the white paper explains how we could create and provide high quality career development for all students and workers for that matter, and offers a 5-point solutions framework. And those 5 points are, first of all, we think we need to emphasize career planning. One of our objectives is that every student should graduate from high school with a personal career plan, laying out where they're hoping to go. That doesn't mean they can't change their plan, but that they're starting with a vision. Secondly, we need to provide professional career advising. And that's going to require an investment of more people to help students figure out where they're going. And this would apply to students in K-12, post-secondary, as well as adult workers who are looking to retool or reskill. Thirdly, we said we need to emphasize applied and work-based learning. Things should not be just academic. You should have hands-on experience and get some real exposure to the workplace. Fourthly, technology needs to play a major role in this, and we need to provide all students with high-quality technology. As we've seen with COVID, millions of students don't have access to that technology right now. And finally, we said we need to change our accountability systems to really focus on career success and what the outcomes are, not just on intermediate measures like test scores. We believe that this framework would accomplish 3 things. It would create a more efficient education system. Right now, we have the highest college dropout rate in the world, and student debt is approaching $1.7 trillion. We think we could address that. Secondly, it would create a more efficient system. Right now, there's a real disconnect between education on the one hand and the workforce on the other. This would help address that. And finally, and most important, we believe this would help create a more equitable education system. Even though we've spent hundreds of billions of dollars in education reform, we continue to be saddled with massive racial achievement gaps, and social mobility in the US has actually been declining. And all of that has been highlighted through the movement for social justice this summer. So we're going to start this discussion by asking each of our panelists to offer some brief introductory comments about the work they're doing. We have an outstanding panel. First up is Jean Eddy, President and CEO of American Student Assistance. And she is going to tell us about the remarkable journey that ASA has been on and how they've realized that career development is actually essential to improving outcomes in post-secondary education. Jean?
Thanks, Bill. And thanks for your opening remarks. Music to my ears. I would have to say, many of you know, ASA is a national guarantor. We have been working with students and their families to figure out how to finance their education, but moreover, how to responsibly pay back their student loans. And over those years, we have worked with many borrowers, many institutions. And we've come to find out that students have come to us in the conversations that we've had saying things like, I really wish I knew more before I actually entered college. or I really wish I had a career choice in mind before I went down this road, or I really wish I had had more information before I started on this journey. So about 3 years ago, we decided that we really needed to take a look at how we could do things differently. How could we have bigger impact and work with students most effectively to get in front of a problem rather than to try and fix it at the end of the problem. So about 3 years ago, we did a pivot on our mission. And basically, it was really an enhancement on our mission that basically said, how can we work with young people earlier on in the process to give them the help they need and the support they need in order to make good decisions as they move through this process. So we changed our mission to encompass the wording that goes like this. We want to help kids know themselves, know their options, and make informed choices to achieve their education and career goals. We did a lot of research and we realized that middle school is absolutely the best time to do that. The research shows that students at that point are most impressionable, they are more willing, they are more curious, and we can actually start in that process to help kids work through and figure out what it is their talents and their interests are, how that might align with skills that they have, and the myriad of careers that they could pursue by the time that they move through high school and beyond. We talk about a plan of direction by the time students finish high school. So it's perfect, a perfect alignment with what Bill has said and what you will certainly hear from some of the other people on this panel.
Thank you very much, Dean. Now we're going to turn to David Miyashiro, who I would call one of the most visionary high school superintendents in America. David runs the lowest income school district in the San Diego area and has told us that his district is actually the largest school district in California that is actually offering in-person learning, which is really amazing. David, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, we're a beautifully diverse TK through 14 district now. And when I first came here about 8 years ago, our board wanted us to get out in the community, so go meet with everybody. And the first meeting was with the city manager, and I asked the city manager, you run the police department, the fire department, public works, what would you do if you ran the school district? And he said, we would stop stigmatizing labor. We would start teaching kids interpersonal skills. We would teach kids that, they have to work hard, and after the first and second time, they still keep trying. And basically told us that what we were doing was all wrong. Then I met with admirals from the Navy and the Marines. We have a big Department of Defense presence in San Diego. They said, you guys are stigmatizing the most important work in our country and national defense. We don't want your leftovers. We want your kids to think that we're the best first choice. And on with the fire department, the police department, Chamber of Commerce, all said the same thing. Your college for all mentality is creating the 1.7 trillion in outstanding student loan debt and producing opportunity youth, which our workforce board has said 16 to 24-year-olds in San Diego that are not working and not in school. And that's regardless of income or status or ethnicity. Poverty and the opportunity gap hits everybody. And then when we took our middle schoolers to Qualcomm and saw the world of work, a one-day experience created by Ed Hidalgo, who now works for us, we created a K-12 curriculum so that every child can know themselves, know their options, and make informed decisions about their future. And shortly after that, Ed called me and said, we got invited to Boston to speak to Jean Eddy and her team, and they speak our language. And that began the journey that connected me with her and you and Grace and Scott, and I'm excited about this conversation on how do we keep this going.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Now I'd like to turn to Scott Stump, who's one of the nation's leading leaders of career and technical education and a real believer in it. He's spent his whole career in that area. Currently, he's serving as Assistant Secretary in the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education at the U.S. Department of Education. Scott?
Bill, thank you for the time to be here, and to all of the panelists, thank you for sharing on this important and critical issue. I will tell you, Bill, you brought up the biggest telling story. 1.5, which it's actually closer to 1.7 trillion dollars in federal financial aid debt, is a sign of a root issue that starts much earlier. And David and Jean, you're exactly right. It starts much younger with students being exposed to, and especially students that are from zip codes and backgrounds backgrounds that don't necessarily get to see all of the careers that are available to be exposed at an early age to those wonderful opportunities. And I would say that's why, this administration and Secretary DeVos firmly believe that it's time to move beyond the historic one size fits all that really was precipitated by, a well-intentioned book, A Nation at Risk, that drove the education agenda for the past 30 years. And all of those investments, trillions of dollars to move scores, when today we look at the NAEP scores being very similar to increase in achievement has not been gained, but yet we've set aside all of the career and technical education or early exposure to careers in our education system. And that's why when Congress reallocation Act in the summer of 2018, we were all excited to see that it included going down to 5th grade with these conversations, making sure that we can start as early as possible, having meaningful conversations with young people, because we know that that makes a difference. Students in high school that participate in a concentration or more than one course of kind of in a career area end up graduating at a higher rate. They enter post-secondary experiences at a higher rate within 8 years, and ultimately they end up having a higher median annual earnings multiple years after they leave high school than their peers. So we know that career guidance and exploration makes a difference. And in addition to the Perkins Act shifting down to 5th grade, this administration also has worked hard to make the college scorecard more relevant, where it can show by degree what the cost of going is and what the earnings are coming out of it. Historically, it's only been on an institution by institution basis, but that doesn't tell a student who's going after a certain degree what return on investments it's going to have at the end of the day. They need to have that information to make informed choices as parents and young people are looking onto these steps. And then the second piece released this summer was a new tool called findsomethingnew.org. And it's a national ad council campaign built by IBM and Apple and a lot of other business partners that highlights the new collar jobs, as IBM likes to call it, and really encourages people to look at different opportunities that are tailored for them and guide them on their path. But I'm excited to look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Scott. And now we're going to turn, last but certainly not least, to Grace Sue, who's Vice President of Education at IBM, been there for many years. And among other things, Grace is responsible for IBM's Incredible P-TECH model, which has introduced a whole new model of education, really helping low-income students achieve far more than they ever thought possible. Grace?
Thank you, Bill. Great to be here. Great to work with you on the coalition and to be with these wonderful panelists today. At IBM, we think that as a company that's bringing advanced technologies to the market, it's really incumbent upon us, as well as other companies, to prepare students for the digital economy. And we have to do so in a deliberate way. And as you heard from Secretary Stump, we are doing that in part through this focus on new-collar jobs. And those are jobs that require more than a high school diploma, but not necessarily a 4-year degree. And there's a number of different initiatives that we're working on. We've got apprenticeship programs underway. We're working on returnships, focusing on adults upskilling and reskilling. And Bill, as you said, we're working on the P-TECH school model, which is now entering into its 10th year. P-TECH was designed to fill skills gaps in the economy while also serving young people who have been historically and consistently denied equitable education opportunities. It's a new way of high school. It's funded by government, and it combines the expertise of high schools, community colleges, and industry partners. It's grades 9 through 14. Students graduate with both their high school diploma and an industry-recognized 2-year associate's degree. In addition to having academic and technical education, industry partners are on hand to provide mentoring, site visits, paid internships, and when students graduate, they're first in line for jobs with their industry partner. So it's really bringing career guidance to life by having industry actively involved in nurturing their own future talent. It's a model now that expands more than 600 industry partners. We're in 24 countries, 220 schools in the US. We're in 11 states. and more than 170 schools, and something that we're working to bring on more industry partners and work with more educators to bring the model to more and more young people.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for those great introductory statements. I'd like to kick us off with a overarching question that really informs all of the ASU GSV Summit this year. You know, I think that the COVID pandemic has been the most disruptive incident probably in the history of American education. Virtually every school institution was shut down for at least a while. Many of them are now scrambling to offer education virtually, et cetera. And what I'd like to ask the panelists is, I think most people would agree that the goal now is not to return to where we were on February 1st before the pandemic arrived, but rather to rebuild a system that's going to be better and more effective and efficient and equitable. And I'd like to ask each of you to talk about the changes you'd like to see as we come out of the pandemic.
Okay, I'll be happy to start, Bill. I would say that what we have learned as we have moved into this new space, into our new mission space, is that we've taken a three-pronged approach. We work with kids directly, we work with systems, school systems and partnerships, and we also work through our advocacy arm. I think that prior to COVID, we were talking actively directly with students and have digital experiences that students are able to use themselves. It has been a godsend for a lot of kids in this country to be able to do that as they were left to try and work from home or not have a curriculum that actually supported them in the early days of COVID. But what we've also understood is that school systems need some help with being able to figure out how to maintain this remote learning that many of us are still doing. In fact, in the state of Massachusetts, no one is in full time. There are some hybrid schools, there are some remote schools, but no one's in full time. So how do we work with school systems to help them be able to figure out how to deliver in a way that they really feel excited about and good about? That being said, we've learned a lot through this, and there are many, many things that we can do very, very well remotely. And how do we maximize that after COVID? How do we help not only young people, but the systems that support them to be able to do that in a far more, I'm going to say, integrated way than we have in the past? Less challenging, more integrating.
Okay, does anybody else want to take a crack at that question?
I'd love to. Thank you, Gene, for that.
Okay.
We in California, we got a 6-month break in terms of they put state testing on a hold. They put some of the things that we'd have to do for accountability on a hold. We even attendance was put on hold. Just try to engage your students, feed them, give them distance learning, and provide free childcare for parents if they need it for essential workers. But California is now putting back all those things into place, trying to quantify, did the child sit on the screen for 6 hours? Mark him here. That's completely ridiculous. Now's the time to look at policy. And that's why we're excited about the role that the federal government's playing and Secretary DeVos's flexibility and choice and local control. This is the time to really innovate. And so we've been measuring pre-pandemic happiness, healthy relationships, and a path to gainful employment through Gallup and a University of San Diego study, where we measure a student's vividness of their possible future selves in related to career, but also personal finance. And with the Office of Federal Student Aid and General Brown's team, we've been able to develop a process where kids start learning about finance starting in kindergarten, complete their FSAID and FAFSA in 8th and 9th grade, all along with the parents, so that all the opportunities post-secondary are available to the children before they start their sophomore and junior year. Because senior year is too late to start thinking about a FAFSA in college. You have to know that before you really start the whole process. And so we're excited about the opportunity. California is the 5th largest economy and 1st largest bureaucracy, so it's a challenge here. But in the states represented on the screen, there's hope.
Okay, we've got a question that's come in from the audience, and I'd like to direct it to Scott Stump to start with. This will be music to your ears, Scott. The question is that it's great to see in COVID that the programs that support technical schools, certificate programs, et cetera. And what they're asking is, do you foresee more and more students as we come out of the pandemic opting for CTE and similar programs. And I think as a starting point, Scott told us the other day that only 50% of high school students take even a single CTE course, and only 20% go on to take more than one and really have a concentration. So Scott, what are your thoughts about that?
What a great question. Thank you for that. And yes, and Bill, you're exactly right. Only about 50% of the 16 million or so high school students that are out there today in any given year will take a CTE course. Many of them jump into one before they graduate, but a lot of those courses have historically been just a quick computer, one semester of a computer applications course and or another kind of entry level course. But only about 1 in 5 come back for a second year or a second course in that treatment, like the P-TECH model, where it's a 2-year cycle that earns them that path to an associate's degree, incorporating also work-based learning experiences, which ties them into a rich mentorship with someone in the field. As far as the numbers that are going to go into this space, what I know from reading Strata, who also works with Gallup, from their surveys, adults that have been displaced are looking, the majority of them, for a short-term certificate or an entry-level opportunity, as opposed to going back for a 2 or 4 year degree. Many of them are not looking to go back in the same industry, and many of the retail jobs were looking at being concerned about what is going to be available in that space. And so we do see them stepping into these industry certification programs, apprenticeships, and a variety of others on their path to a post-pandemic career.
Scott, in my years in working in this, I've often heard the phrase that CTE is really for other kids, not my kids, but for other
it's
kids.
Absolutely for my kids. All 3 of them went through it, and honestly, I'll be honest with you, and I'm an overindulgent dad, but I blend my work with my home. I don't have a defined space between the two. So each of them, early on, as they were 8th graders, were taking for interest inventories, which I know have some bias to them, but at least it's one way of starting to think through. We were also asking them, what roles might you play in the community? What things are you interested in? And it has allowed for, at least for my two oldest sons, to make it through the baccalaureate degrees within less than 4 years, both of them one in artificial intelligence and machine learning. I have to joke, Bill, I told this when we were back in DC in January, but my son has 2 AI certifications. Most of you that are listening in will immediately go to artificial intelligence. That was his second AI certification. His first was when he was in high school, and it was artificial insemination. We raise cattle in the Eastern Plains of Colorado, and he learned how to breed his own cows. A $70,000 job if you can get in with one of the dairies in our area. So As a senior in high school, industry certification, did he use it for the long term? But no, if he ever needs to fall back there, he has a wonderful option to do that, in addition to being able to mine big data for really smart things. So anyway.
So I think the listeners today learn that if somebody talks about AI, they can remind them there's also a career in artificial insemination, which they probably didn't know. So Grace, the second part of this question we got is, which is ideally suited for you, is will employers change their requirements for job applications moving forward? And you might start by telling us how IBM, one of the nation's largest employers, has already made some changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And new collar jobs is not just a tagline for us. It's really the way that we're now hiring. IBM is a company that has more mathematicians than any other company on the planet. But at the same time, our new collar workforce, again, a focus on skills and pedigree, is 15% of our current workforce. So we really are hiring workers without considering where necessarily they went to school. We just want to make sure that you have the right skills sets, both academic, technical, and professional skills, critical thinking, ability to think in an agile way, be flexible. Those are the kinds of workers we're looking for 21st century jobs. And I think it does relate to, your question to Scott, which is, how can CTE be for everybody? And that's when we start to see companies, Fortune 500 companies like IBM, doing hiring into well-paying, competitive job opportunities that aren't dead ends, that they're career ladders. And then we can see that CTA truly is for everybody. It's a viable pathway to a meaningful and growing career.
Okay, great. Another key issue we're examining at ASU GSV is the huge challenge of creating a more equitable education and economic system. And Jean, I know you thought a lot about this, how we can address that. Starting, maybe we could start would be, who do we admit to higher education and what are we looking for? In my years in the field, one thing I've done is study elite college admissions in enormous depth. And what they used to say is there are only about 2,000 low-income or minority students in the US who have SAT scores high enough to go to a place like Harvard or Princeton, so we can't admit anymore. What are your thoughts about that, about expanding access to really excellent education in the US?
I think education has to be for everyone. And I think it's all a matter of how we approach it. I think that when I first met you, Bill, I told you that I spent most of my career in higher education. I worked in enrollment at 5 different institutions. So I have some familiarity with how students are admitted to classes, et cetera. And I think that in most cases, colleges and universities really try to do a good job in building a class. In other words, bringing an array of kids that they want to come in to create an atmosphere for students that kind of resembles the world that they're going to enter into after they graduate. But that being said, we need to do more to give every kid an opportunity to get a leg up. In other words, there's some great programs out there right now, whether they're early college programs or they're programs through edX, as an example, where kids can take courses towards microbachelors and be able to stack them, to allow kids not only to try out some things in college, but also get some credentials that look really, really good on a resume when someone is applying to a college. But I do think that the better job that we do early on with middle school kids in particular, and I know that David and I have had this conversation where he will say it has to start in kindergarten. And I believe that, I do believe that too, because I've talked to some of his kindergartners out in the San Diego area, and I'm with them. But if we can have kids really dock into what they love to do and how they can identify their skills and passions and be able to see a pathway to that, an awful lot of the kids who are disaffected or don't have an opportunity would get them, because we would be able to find ways to deliver it to them. But right now we have such a wide array of things with not all that much path for all of these young people to take. And I do think we could level things out if we had more of that.
So David, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how your parents feel in Cajon Valley. So tell us a little bit about who lives in Cajon Valley, what these parents are doing, and what their hopes and dreams are for their kids, and what barriers they see. I mean, one of the tragedies is that we've really almost calcified our system in the sense that if you're born into poverty, certain neighborhoods, your odds of succeeding are virtually infinitesimal. And that's why so many young people feel the American dream has died. David?
Yes, we have a great diverse community. About 2/3 of our community are below the poverty level. But 1/3 of our community is very affluent, very little in between. So we really have a tale of 2 cities in our community. So very affluent, low income, but also 42 languages spoken. We have the largest Middle Eastern refugee population in the country in San Diego. And that really gives the opportunity to really focus on those 2 levers that you mentioned and that Jean talked about, equity and opportunity. So the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that touches all of us started in the 60s with an aim to desegregate schools. Lyndon Baines Johnson said, in order to segregate, this $4 billion that's going to be put out to the public school system has to have that as part of it. In the turn of the century, the Bush administration introduced No Child Left Behind, reauthorizing it, making eliminating poverty the goal. And he measured that by test scores, which was the right mission and idea, but the wrong, I think, direction to do it. And then now that the ESSA, the Every Child Succeeds Act, is starting to point in the right direction. Equity and opportunity for us is happy kids engaged in healthy relationships on a path to gainful employment. And if we were held accountable for that happiness, I know my strengths, interests, and values, and I feel good about myself. I have self-esteem and self-efficacy. Relationships, I know my peers deeply and well, and they know me deeply and well. And path to gainful employment, I know all the career opportunities available to me. I have all the financial access provided by all the different resources, and I have a plan. And then we turn our students over to ASA and the Department of Education and watch them choose their path, whether it's 2-year, 4-year certificate, or straight into our local police and fire academy based on who they are and what they want to do in the world.
Okay, great. Grace, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you've structured P-TECH to try to expand opportunities for those kids who've been left behind traditionally.
P-TECH is completely open enrollment, so there's no testing or grade requirements in order to be able to be part of P-TECH school. We started them all in 2011 in Brooklyn, New York, but we never wanted this to be a single jewel serving hundreds of students. So we immediately began to think about, how do we make this open source? How do we replicate this model throughout the country and then eventually throughout the world as well? So we've been focusing on stewarding the model forward, working with policymakers primarily at the state level, but also at the federal level with the reauthorization of Perkins, which can help support models like P-TECH, in order to be able to fund, make sure that there's funding for this new idea of high school being grades 9 through 14 and earning an associate's degree at no cost to young people. What we're trying to do through providing students with career opportunities, whether it's mentorship, so that students are really inspired by the adults around them and that they have real manifestations of what an industry person, but also by expanding their social networks. As we all know, a lot of way you get to a job is because of who you know, or someone knows somebody, and that gets you to a great opportunity. So with P-TECH, we're building students' networks through the mentorship, through paid internships, so that they can start to work, and we know that work begets work. So there's a number of different ways that we're trying to make sure that students are making their way into the middle class through this opportunity. And it's not just about jobs, it can also be about more education. We're finding that most of our students want to go on for more college, and about 30% of the students want to work. And we have students who've finished P-TECH, gone on to college, and now are back at IBM working in their jobs. We have the first student who's actually getting her PhD. But it's really about de-siloing the system, having high school, community college, and industry working together, holding hands with the student, providing them with the supports they need to degree attainment, a real understanding of career so that they can get that job that they feel passionate about.
Okay, we've got another question, Scott, which is really, I was going to ask.
Jump in on that one for just a second on from what Grace said, because the new Perkins Act coincides with everything she just laid out, of having now requiring a comprehensive local needs assessment where business and industry, post-secondary partners, and secondary high schools and community colleges all come together and sit down first and say, what programs should we be offering? But then they also have to look at, by law, disaggregated data by all of the special populations, whether that be race and ethnicity, gender, students with disabilities, students in poverty, and say, are we serving all of these students? Are they enrolling at an appropriate rate? Are they persisting and achieving at a consistent rate? And so built into the new law is something that is really going to open up access across the country for students that have not been served with in-demand programs like health and IT and manufacturing. And I'm very excited about that. And that's why the president this past year in the budget asked for a doubling of Perkins to expand these opportunities for students across the country and expand career guidance and opportunities for more students as well.
So here's a follow-up question to one we addressed earlier. Once again, coming back to CTE. And the question is that the traditional stigma is that CTE is for a certain type of kid. And most often kids who are not doing that well in academic classes, lower level kids. How are you working to change that stigma? Scott, do you want to take that to start with?
Yeah, I would say that we just had 2 weeks ago a gathering. It was actually a visioning meeting for kind of 200 leaders from CTE across the country, hosted by Advanced CTE, the Association for Career and Technical Education, and others. And that stigma still does somewhat persist. I will tell you, though, that it is changing, in my opinion, because as the cost of higher education has continued to expand, and parents are looking at, and students are looking at the potential bills ahead of them, we're getting more and more students that are questioning the value of higher education. And at the same time, you have high school programs in robotics, in coding, the P-Tech model that is not an easy A. We're starting to shift those opinions of the old historic shop class. And I will tell you that if people take a look and really dig in, they're going to find rich and pretty significant pathways that can start in high school and through an early college model, get students on their path to an associate's degree that then leverages into a baccalaureate degree if they want it. So again, it's about multiple pathways, and that's the message we're sharing to try and dispel the myth and the stigma of historic VOTEC.
And of course, the reality is that in many cases, exposure to CTE can really enhance a young person's ability to both identify a career and excel in that career. One of my sons went to Minuteman Vocational Technical High School in Massachusetts and Lexington. One of his classmates went to MIT. So I think that it'd be hard to say that that kid was a loser or a lower level student, but he came into MIT with extraordinary exposure to what engineering is really all about. Rather than just studying academic subjects, he'd had some actual application to that.
Can I jump on?
And Bill, I would say that my son was the only mechanical engineering student at Colorado State University that had touched and worked metal in his life because of his high school CTE program, but it made him at the top of his class in mechanical engineering because of that.
Right, and the cost of that for our society is enormous, because the reality is that only about half the students who enter engineering programs at the university level actually graduate with an engineering degree. And then after graduation, many of them leave engineering because they didn't really know what they were getting into. It's that lack of concrete exposure to what engineers do that lead to the success. And along those lines, there's an innovative engineering college called Olin College of Engineering outside Boston, which actually starts students right away, challenging them to solve real world problems, even if they don't have all the technical skills, but to introduce them to what engineers actually do.
Yeah, so
David, were you going to say something?
Yeah, so in addition to what you both said about the stigmatization, that's exactly what the admirals and the police chief and the Chamber of Commerce and the city manager was telling me. And it's a design flaw. Our system measures, are you smart or not, by standardized tests, and says if you're smart, you go there, and if you're not, you have these other options. But the question should be, is how are you smart? And that's Keith Nuthall in my ear, one of our colleagues, saying that school should be an opportunity for kids to explore everything and find their strengths and interests, and how they are smart and how they will be successful and enjoy their work. Number one is relationships and turn to happiness. Number two is career satisfaction, not just career, job, and money, career satisfaction. You want to be working in the area where you would feel like, if I didn't have to work anymore, I still do it anyways, right?
Okay, well, my first comment is this panel has been way too polite. I guess I was, my opinions were sort of shaped by what we saw in the presidential debate the other night, and we haven't shown anybody interrupting or making other comments like that. But we're coming close to the end of the panel, and I'd like to throw out another question, which I'd like all of you to answer, which is to achieve the vision we're talking about, where do you see education in 5 or 10 years from today? Grace, do you want to off with that?
Sure. I think we really need to see hybrid ecosystems. I think we can't leave the hard work of education to schools alone. I think for students to really understand career opportunities, industry has to be involved in an appropriate way, sharing their best expertise, but leaving education to the educators. So I think that's a huge piece of it. I think, now we're in this new normal, and we've really got to figure out in-person is crucial, and absolutely having students be in school in person is a must. But at the same time, how can online tools help? Online tools can democratize education, provide content to students, as long as we get the hardware and the connectivity first, of course. But for example, because we know P-TECH was only reaching so many students, 170 students, 70 schools, which is tremendous, it's still just a drop in the bucket. So we started Open P-TECH, which is an online platform to teach students about emerging technologies. They can earn the same badges IBMers earn, and it's really a way to democratize education further.
Okay, so what you're saying is that 5 years from now, you'd like to see a lot more involvement from business and programs that lead more directly to employment. Jean, what about you? What's your vision? I think Jean is muted. David, what's your vision?
I'm here. I'm here. I'm just not, I was just not as quick as I should have been. Sorry about that. I think in 5 years from now, we are going to definitely see a blended model. What I am amazed at in working with young students, particularly middle schoolers and a little bit older than that, and what our research shows is that they are very self-directed. And why I am particularly interested in that is because when we talk about how we don't have an even playing field, the one place that seems to be an even playing field is that kids starting at 14 or 15, everywhere you look, they have a mobile phone. They may not have a PC at home, they may not have a Chromebook at home, but they do have a mobile device. And one of the things that we're doing is we're working directly with kids using their mobile device and giving them opportunities to go exploring about themselves, their interests and passions, but also being able to look at various careers that they might want to explore and even talk to people who have those careers, shadow people, etc. I think that
excuse me, we're running out. I guess we're going to end the session, but I'd like to thank everybody for taking part in this panel and encourage those in the audience to reach out to our wonderful speakers to learn more about the work they're doing. Thank you very much.